mistake that a reporter was inadvertently added to a signal chat with high-level national security principles.
When I served in the military and I served in classified environments, had this happened to me, I would have walked my resignation in immediately.
There's no units, no locations, no routes, no flight paths, no sources, no methods, no classified information.
No acceptance of responsibility, no acknowledgement that this was wrong and put our troops at risk.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, war plan, attack plan, whatever you call it, we now have the play-by-play. Why? Because the Atlantic magazine today released more text messages that it received inadvertently, and the new revelations detail what was sent from an account belonging to Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, relaying specific operational details of upcoming military strikes on Houthi forces and targets in Yemen. Included in this information, targets, weapons the U.S. would deploy, attack sequencing, even weather forecasts. Today in Hawaii, Hegseth denied again that classified information was shared. Let's listen.
Well, I noticed this morning out came something that doesn't look like war plans. And as a matter of fact, they even changed the title to attack plans because they know it's not war plans.
President Trump focused on working to change the story, if that's possible. This afternoon, he touted his record to date in office the second time around at a Women's History Month event at the White House. We start tonight with Charlie D'Agata and Jennifer Jacobs. Jennifer's at the White House. Charlie D'Agata is at the Pentagon. Charlie, I want to start with some sound from the Defense Secretary, the Director of National Intelligence, and the Secretary of State. Let's play that.
Well, I noticed this morning out came something that doesn't look like war plans. And as a matter of fact, they even changed the title to attack plans because they know it's not war plans.
It was a mistake that a reporter was inadvertently added to a signal chat with high-level national security principles, having a policy discussion about imminent strikes against the Houthis.
Obviously, someone made a mistake. Someone made a big mistake and added a journalist. Nothing against journalists, but you ain't supposed to be on that thing.
So, Charlie, here's what I want to ask you about. It seems there is a concerted effort to, if there is an admission of guilt or reference to a mistake, the mistake so far in the rhetoric from Trump administration officials is limited to the inclusion, inadvertent inclusion, of Jeff Goldberg of The Atlantic on this text chain, not discussing this sensitive information on an unsecured commercial app known as Signal. That still strikes me as highly problematic based on my experience, and I imagine, I know for a fact, you have much more experience in that world than I do.
Major, I've never seen anything like it. And, you know, it's a classic, it's a cliche of kill the messenger, not the message. Because, you know, Jeffrey Goldberg, in his article, he said that the consequences for American pilots could have been catastrophic. And I'm always careful of being prone to exaggeration. But reading these entries of the full chat, I can't argue with that. And here's the reason. So you've got the U.S. Secretary of Defense among a very small, close-hold group of people who would have known that information. He sends a message on that Signal group 31 minutes before, that's critical, before the launch of the first U.S. jet fighters, in this case, off F-18s off the deck of the USS Harry S. Truman, and more than 2 hours before a strike on what was referred to as a terrorist target at his known location. So had that information fallen into the hands of the Houthis or somebody who could have helped the Houthis, they would have had more than enough time to prepare for it, to take cover, to change locations, to use their surface-to-air missiles to target warplanes and their pilots. You know, they have had the capability of shooting down high-flying drones. And the most damning part of these new revelations, and this is the reason, you know, we've already discussed the first wave, the first report that came out, and he was very careful about not giving out information in those initial reports. So this gave the exact timings of the launch, the exact weapons packages that were used, F-18 fighter jets, strike drones. followed by sea-based Tomahawk cruise missiles. These are his words, including the timings of those launches before and during those operations. He even mentioned OPSEC clean, operational security, to sort of, well, I don't know. It's actually first acknowledging that maybe the information that he was sharing might have been sensitive or classified. And it also strikes me that nobody else in that room maybe thought, you know what, this seems really detailed. Maybe we should take this to a different place. Didn't strike anybody there. That is what I found astonishing in the more information that was shared in this report.
And Jennifer Jacobs at the White House, I want to play you something, two pieces of sound. One is from President Trump last night on Newsmax, and then today is an exchange at a House hearing involving the FBI Director Kash Patel and Christy Houlihan, a member of Congress, Democrat from Pennsylvania. I want to listen to them in sequence because I think one plays into the other. Let's listen.
What it was, we believe, is somebody that was on the line with permission, somebody that was with Mike Waltz, worked for Mike Waltz at a lower level, had, I guess, Goldberg's number or called through the app, and somehow this guy ended up on the call. Now, it wasn't classified, as I understand it. There was no classified information. There was no problem. I feel very comfortable, actually.
Do you believe that it's now time potentially for the FBI to open an investigation into this?
I'm not going to comment on that.
Because you're the director of the FBI, you don't believe it's appropriate to comment on that?
Because there's a process in place, there's an ongoing litigation, and the National Security Council is reviewing this matter. And I'm not going to discuss any open or closed investigations.
That ongoing investigation, literally, the lawsuit happened today or yesterday afternoon, and the idea that you don't have an opinion on this at this point is frustrating to me.
No, it's not. I'm not going to prejudge any matters, and the men and women of the FBI will call the balls and strikes.
Reclaiming my time,
not
sir.
you.
So, Jennifer, the reason I think those things play into one another is the president has said he has no problem with this, doesn't believe this is an FBI matter. And the FBI director, answering questions from members of Congress, said, I have no opinion on it. Those things seem to be aligned.
Right. What I can tell you, Major, is that the New Atlantic reporting created a whole new firestorm this morning. The whole theme for today was mistakes were made. So that's an advancement on yesterday with officials admitting that mistakes were made. And the president himself said that the mission wasn't compromised, that the attack wasn't affected. But I can tell you that there were many conversations happening behind closed doors in the White House, in the administration, with people talking about how this was very hard to defend, that this information really was classified information. In fact, one of my sources said that this would have been considered target folder information, which would be a subset of a war plan because it had specific targets and specific weapon systems. So the private conversations that were happening today were about how this was a bad look for the National Security Advisor for creating this chain to begin with, a bad look for the Secretary of Defense to be talking in this chain like it was his first time ever doing such an operation and talking about how everything was awesome and how nobody spoke up and said, hey, we should move this to the high side, which is the classified system. So there was just a lot of cringing and just many, many conversations behind closed doors today about this on day 3 when it seemed like that this was dying down, but it just reopened again today.
And Jennifer, that's a crucial bit of reporting you just discussed because there is this nonchalance publicly that you said is not reflective of the internal conversations right now.
Right. The officials that I have spoken to said this is just really hard to defend. But you did see the administration officials go out on television today and try to defend it. The Secretary of State said, look, I only weighed in twice to name my representative for this and to congratulate afterwards. Steve Witkoff publicly said, hey, I used good cyber hygiene when I was over in Russia. You had the Treasury Secretary say, I prefer using the telephone. I'm an old school guy. So they were doing their best to defend what has been very difficult to defend. But I did ask the press secretary in today's White House briefing, can you say definitively that no one will lose their jobs over this? And she could not say that. She just says, all I can say definitively is that the president still has confidence in his national security team. And then some of my other national security sources said the key here is that battle assessment, the assessment on whether every single target that was planned to be hit on March 15th, on the day of the strike, was actually hit. Because if they weren't, that would be an indication that perhaps the enemies did get some of this information, that the mission was compromised, and that perhaps they moved some of the targets. So we're still seeking answers on that. I asked the press secretary about that today, and she referred us to the Pentagon. So we'll keep digging on that.
Excellent. Charlie Daggett at the Pentagon and Jennifer Jacobs at the White House. Thank you very, very much. Supreme Court today upheld a Biden-era rule on unserialized, therefore untraceable firearms. They're called ghost guns. The justices ruled 7-2 that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives did not overstep its authority with this new regulation. The rule subjects ghost guns, which is a firearm that you can put together through components or you can purchase either as a kit or in separate pieces, to the same requirements as commercially available firearms. What's unclear is if the Trump administration will keep this Biden-era rule, now ruled constitutional by the Supreme Court, in place. So, what safeguards can be put in place to ensure the leaking of war plans or attack plans doesn't happen again? Well, don't go on signal. That might be one start. But there might be other ideas, and we'll speak to New York Republican Congressman Mike Lawler about his ideas next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. More than a handful of Republicans on Capitol Hill today described the leak of the Signal group chat regarding the Houthis and attack plans as a, quote, mistake. But some went a little bit further, and they tried to downplay whether these sensitive details were really that sensitive in the first place. Let's listen.
There was no locations listed there. There were no sources of methods. There's no specific target. Certainly there was nothing called war plans, which was an embellishment and exaggeration by a known left-wing partisan opponent of the president.
New York Republican Congressman Mike Lawler joins me now. Congressman, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Look, let's stipulate up front that this set of attacks was different than the Biden administration, that it was carried out well, and it probably did important damage relevant to an important international commercial matter, which is traveling through the Red Sea without being harassed by the Houthis. I don't want to lose sight of that. Stipulate that up front. Are you comfortable that details of that successful mission were conducted on Signal, one, and two, that any reporter, Jeff Goldberg or any other, was inadvertently included?
So a few things here, Major. Number one, I do agree to the stipulation. This was a successful mission, an important mission. The Houthis had been allowed to act with impunity over the last, year and a half under the watchful eye of the Biden administration. The fact is that this was necessary, and I do think the mission was executed well. That being said, as I said the day this story broke, this type of information, this type of discussion should occur in secure locations and using secure platforms. I would note in December of last year, the Biden administration and CISA put out guidance with respect to end-to-end encryption and using apps like Signal for communication and encouraging folks to do so. But obviously, when you're talking about sensitive, information such as this, it is imperative that we take all precaution. And certainly, in this instance, you had a situation where a reporter was added to this group chat. I'm sure we will get, down to how and who specifically. But at the end of the day, anytime you are using an application like this, there is great potential. Not just that somebody be mistakenly added, but we all know, people screen grab conversations. I mean, there's so many potentials here.
And Mike, let me jump in if I could, because this administration wastes no time in mocking Biden-era rules. So I want to talk to you about what the NSA under the Trump administration said last month. Don't go on Signal if you're discussing anything sensitive. Times of your kid's soccer match, fine. But anything sensitive, don't be on Signal under any circumstances. That's a Trump-era advisory.
Look, I think many people acknowledge this was a mistake. It is something that should not have happened. And I, obviously believe there needs to be guardrails put in place to ensure it never happens again. I do think folks need to acknowledge that and make sure this does not happen. Our adversaries are looking for every, means and method to make sure that they are able to thwart our efforts, and in this instance, obviously, a very successful mission. But, obviously, when we're talking about national security, we all have to take due caution in how we engage in it.
Mike, do you believe Jeff Goldberg acted in any way irresponsibly in the handling of this matter?
Look, I think obviously folks can have their opinion on how this was characterized, the information that was revealed in the text exchange. Obviously, we saw more information this morning. I think obviously he did not release it in real time, which I think, frankly, to his credit, I think that's important. It could have jeopardized the mission. But ultimately, obviously, this is a situation where a mistake was made and it should not have happened. And so, ultimately, from my vantage point, I think that is the issue at hand that needs to be addressed and corrected.
I also want to talk to you about something that's going on with the Social Security Administration, and not just your district, but congressional districts around the country are slated to lose regional offices. What are you going to do about that? Are you happy with that?
Yeah, so to be clear, field offices are not being shut down. It is specific to hearing offices, and specifically the one that is within proximity to my district, the White Plains hearing office, is about 66,000 square feet. About 80% of these cases are now being heard virtually. There were issues with that office with respect to mold. The Biden administration is the one that put that office on the path to closure. They informed us of that at the end of last year, that this office was going to be closed. I have been working with the administration to find a solution. We obviously want to make sure that people have access when they need a hearing. The field office itself within my district in Rockland County is under renovation. It's been for a year. It is slated to reopen in May. I am working to try to get resolution on the hearing office so that potentially Social Security Administration would allow the Rockland field office to be used as a hearing office as well, which is only about 15 minutes from White Plains. Obviously, we want to make sure people have access to their benefits, have access to the Social Security Administration, and that they get the services they are entitled to here. So I have been pushing back against, the closure, but I want to work towards a positive solution here to address the concerns, but also make sure that my constituents and constituents across this country are served by the Social Security Administration.
New York Republican Congressman Mike Lawler. Mike, thanks. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Major.
President Trump, at this very moment, is speaking to reporters in the Oval Office. We are monitoring that. Much of the conversation is about the potential of new auto tariffs. We'll keep an eye on that, bring you more updates as they become available to us. Meanwhile, honoring the victims of the deadly Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse in Baltimore. That happened, as you might remember, 1 year ago today. Next, we'll hear from Maryland Governor Wes Moore, right here on America Decides.
We remember the heartbreak that we felt to learn that 6 remarkable Marylanders who had been working while we slept, 6 patriots who endured the rattling of cars and trucks so the rest of us could be safe, that they were now unaccounted for.
Welcome back. That was Maryland Governor Wes Moore, marking 1 year since Baltimore's Key Bridge collapsed because it was struck by a large cargo vessel called the Dolly that lost control because it ran out of power. 6 construction workers who were on that bridge at the time lost their lives. Their family members were among those who took part in today's memorial. I want to bring in Nicole Skanga, who joins us from Baltimore and spoke with Governor Moore. Nicole, what did he tell you? And what is the sense there 1 year after this terrific tragedy?
Yeah, just yesterday, Major, the governor had dinners with the families of the 6 victims: Alejandro, Dorlean, Minor, Miguel, Jose, Carlos, all of them immigrants aging from 26 to 49 years old. And Governor Moore and I spoke about conversations we had with one man in particular. Moises Diaz was a member of that construction crew. He was meant to be on the bridge that night when it collapsed, but due to a last-minute shift change was not. And he told me that in the days and weeks preceding the collapse, individuals who were driving past that construction crew would roll down their windows and say out loud, "Go back to Mexico," and scream other profanities at the crew. And I asked the governor if he was concerned that perhaps this reflected a larger sentiment held not only in Baltimore, but across the country. Take a listen.
I think this country, unfortunately, needs a reminder that we are tied, and we're unified, and we need each other. And when we're having all these large conversations, national conversations, and I have said publicly, and I still will continue to say that, yes, do we need to have, immigration reform, and do we need Congress to do their job and act on it? 100% we do. And we also can never forget our humanity. And we can never forget the things that also makes this country strong.
And Major, it reminded me of a question you posed 1 year ago that struck me so much I wrote it down. Whether the deaths of these 6 men may begin to dislodge the rapid contemporary reflex to scorn those who come to America to work, to flee violence, to find a better life, to turn shovels and fill potholes while we warmly sleep. I'm not sure if we have an answer to that question a year later, but I know it's something top of mind for the governor and many who have paid tribute to these victims today.
And Nicole, what is the status of the port, traffic, commercial and otherwise, and the bridge reconstruction itself?
Major, it was important to the governor today that Baltimore speak in one voice. This new bridge is expected to be put up in 2028. And, late December is when that federal spending bill was passed in Congress in order to, federally fund this bridge. I asked him if this administration has given him reassurances that that will indeed happen, despite all of the, focus and emphasis on cutting back. He said he was reassured of that. And he also told me that it was important for Maryland to put a united front as he sort of tried to lead through this chaotic time in a divided America. Take a listen. What has this past year taught you about how to lead in a divided America?
You need to lead with humanity. Never forget the people who are impacted most on this. And it's those 6 families. That we have to make big goals and then put together plans and actually achieving them. And we have to stand united. I'm an Army guy and I'm a combat vet. The thing that I learned in combat was that the only certainty is uncertainty. Things are going to change. And so you have to be prepared and moving together.
And throughout all of our conversation, Major, we kept coming back to the families, the governor making it clear he wants them at the center of the bridge collapse commemoration today and also this rebuild. Major.
Nicole Skanga, an important day, an important interview. Thank you very much. Were details in that Signal conversation that's now become so topical this week classified or not? Well, lawyers will debate that. We'll try to get to some of the answers about that when we talk to our political panel here at the desk next, right here on America Decides. Well, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. As you see, President Trump right now has announced new measures imposing tariffs on automobiles. President moments ago signed an executive order that he said imposes a 25% tariff on all cars. Well, this is what a definition of an import is, not made in the United States. During comments in the Oval Office, the president said this measure could lead car makers here in the United States bringing back factories maybe from elsewhere. I will just say, before we get to our political panel, that the car makers themselves have said that's not exactly what's going to happen, and certainly not immediately. That process would take 3 to 5 years minimum. Liza Acevedo and Justin Safey join me here at the desk. Liza, former Director of Communications for then Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff. Justin, former Senior Policy Advisor to then Governor Jeb Bush, and very familiar with Susie Wiles and lots of other Florida Republicans close to the Trump White House. Great to have you both here. So, Liza, I'm sure when you worked for the Second Gentleman, you did all sorts of national security conversations on Signal, right?
Well, no, we did not at all, Major. I will tell you, I did work at the Department of Homeland Security for Secretary Mayorkas before I worked for the Second Gentleman. And any time we were discussing even sensitive information, we would go into something called a SCIF. If I had to brief the Secretary of Homeland Security,
and help my audience remember what that acronym stands for, SCIF.
Well,
Secured Compartmented Information Facility.
You got it. We were not using Signal as a way to distribute sensitive or confidential information. So when I think about what this White House is doing right now, frankly, I feel like they're just lying and gaslighting to the American public, and I don't understand it. This was confidential information that was in those messages. They need to own it. And on top of that, Major, where I think it's completely not acceptable, is they put the lives of service members, of our men and women in military, in uniform, on the line, and I feel like that's completely unacceptable.
Justin, you know that there is an option for any White House in a difficult situation, particularly one of its own creation. I've covered White Houses dating back to 2000. You have two options. String out a story by mucking up your initial reaction, or owning something, calling it what it is, and then moving on. The White House is still struggling with option one. Blaming the messenger, diverting attention, saying something is and it isn't. They could do one thing. The operation succeeded. We screwed up in this instance, and we're moving on. Why not?
I've had that conversation with a lot of friends and colleagues, and
what are they saying?
Well, I think that I think the White House is determining on the fly what their response is going to be. But I think that what we have seen is some level of consistency of trying to not admit that anything was done wrong. Although we did see. Secretary Rubio said a mistake was made.
But only saying the mistake was including Jeff Goldberg from The Atlantic, not communicating on Signal.
Right.
And our James Laporta sat at this desk yesterday and read out loud a Trump-era National Security Agency advisory: do not communicate anything sensitive on Signal. That's an obvious screw-up.
It is. You
would agree with that, wouldn't you?
I would agree that these conversations should not be taking place on Signal.
Okay.
I don't think that. I think that it's a teachable moment. I think that the administration will take away a lot from this experience, and I think that I would be surprised if administration officials in the future use Signal for these types of military action conversations.
And Liza, you well remember during your time with the Biden administration how sympathetic Republicans were to teachable moments.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'm sure you'll be similarly sympathetic.
I've thought about this a number of ways. If this happened under the Biden administration, Republicans would be out there on the front lines right now screaming that President Biden should get rid of Jake Sullivan, that the Secretary of Defense should be stepping down. So frankly, I think Democrats need to continue to keep the pressure on this right now. I hear them calling for resignations and for people to be fired, and I do think there needs to be some accountability in this moment. Now, whether Republicans have the courage to actually stand up and say something, that's to be told.
Let me press you on an underlying issue, though. The mission itself wasn't compromised, and it appeared to send a very direct signal to the Houthis about something that matters, not just the United States, but to all of Europe, which is moving commercial vessels without harassment through the Red Sea.
The Secretary of Defense had to go onto a server. He had to copy information from that server and manually put it into a Signal chat. There's so many things that is messed up with that on its face. And again, I will bring it back to the lives of service members who were on the ground.
But you will stipulate the mission was a success, and it's probably a good thing.
They should have never done this over a Signal.
Okay.
I'll say the mission was a success, and that's what's being lost. This is a process story. The mistake was made. I'm sure it won't happen again. and the mission itself was a success, which is why I think at the end of the day, it's not going to be tremendously politically damaging to the administration, because at the end of the day, it's about sending a message to Iran that you have a different administration than the Biden administration that let the Houthis operate without penalty and without consequence.
Let's quickly get to tariffs. Justin, are you confident that wherever the president lands on tariffs, now with 25% on autos, maybe auto parts, which will inevitably raise sticker prices for American consumers, everyone pretty much agrees to that. Is that going to work politically?
Well, we'll see. I mean, I think that the president. Well, I think that I don't know.
Okay.
And it depends on who the tariffs are applied to. We just saw the announcement you just made about the executive order that was signed today. But the attempt is to try to bring more manufacturing and increase the U.S. industrial base. It may be successful. Economists differ on whether it will be. Clearly, there's a trade imbalance with the United States. We have massive trade deficits with countries around the world, with Europe, with Asia, and President Trump's trying to rebalance it. It's very similar. I'm old enough to remember Ross Perot talking about a giant sucking sound in the 1992 presidential debate. So this is not a new issue. It's an issue that's been at the forefront of U.S. economic policy and trade policy for 3 decades.
I covered Ross Perot's campaign in 1992. That was a reference to NAFTA. NAFTA was rewritten by the Trump administration as USMCA. So if there are problems with that trade agreement now, I think we need to go to the author. That would be
well,
President Trump.
I think the author's got something to say about that.
Acevedo and Justin Safey. Just had to add that in, folks. It's just part of the record, okay? To Pennsylvania now, where Democrats were able to keep their majority in the state house after winning a special election last night by, well, only 25 points. That win gave Democrats a 102 to 101 majority, this after months of deadlock. DNC Chair Ken Martin says this win helps Democrats in the state, quote, stand up to Trump, end quote. Election fraud in this country, exceedingly rare. That is a fact, an immovable fact. Yet in a new executive order, proof of U.S. citizenship would be required on election forms. How that move, which will certainly face legal challenges, could potentially disenfranchise millions of eligible American voters. We'll have that conversation next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. President Trump yesterday signed an executive order the White House says very well could reshape federal elections. Of course, elections are conducted state by state here in this country. The sweeping order, which will inevitably face numerous legal challenges, would, among other things, require proof of citizenship to register to vote, seeks to mandate that all U.S. ballots be received and counted on Election Day. That's not how we do it now. Joining us now, Scott McFarland. He's our Justice Department correspondent, and David Becker, CBS News election law expert and contributor. He's also the executive director of the Center for Election Innovation and Research and the co-author of a mighty fine book called The Big Truth. You can check out and find out who the other co-author is in your leisure hours. David, you know this space very well. This executive order runs many, many pages.
10 pages.
Requiring lots of things, stipulating things that are flawed in our system now, that are openings to rigging and illegality. What's your takeaway from it?
So putting aside whether there's any justification for any of these massive changes, we should remember the Constitution has something called the Elections Clause, and it says the time, place, and manner of elections is left to the states and the legislatures of the states. And when Democrats have tried to push massive election overhauls like H.R. 1 in 2021, Republicans raised an uproar, said this is a federal takeover of elections. This is, in many ways, even more radical. It's an attempt
because it doesn't go through the legislature at all.
Not at all. He did it with a swipe of a pen. It seeks to force states to impose vast new bureaucracies around their voter registration systems. It may require states to change all of their election technology. It probably comes with a price tag of about tens of billions of dollars just eyeballing at what this would require. It's a massive overhaul, and of course, it has no congressional authority behind it.
And it says that there's some fundamental problem in our country with mail-in ballots arriving after Election Day. Quite a few states do that.
And have done it for decades, if not, centuries. I mean, we've had mail ballots since before the Civil War. There are many states ranging politically from California to Mississippi that allow ballots that have been relinquished on Election Day. In other words, the person has no more control over it. They've cast the ballot, put it into a mailbox or something like that, but maybe have a few more days for it to arrive. And importantly, federal law also requires that ballots that come in from uniformed and overseas citizens, people who are serving the United States overseas, be allowed to come in after the deadline as well. So I think this is that's a potential problem with this. And of course, it seizes that power from the states.
One other quick thing. This executive order name checks India, Brazil, Germany, Canada, and Denmark and Sweden for having all these super simple applications for their voting procedures. Help us understand the context.
Well, it's interesting because I don't know if they fully understand what's happening in all of these countries. These countries have different election systems, different voting systems, much simpler ballots, usually one race on a ballot, whereas I was just in Arizona, 85 races on the Maricopa County, contests on the Maricopa County ballots in 2024. Also, interestingly, he points to the importance of paper ballots, even though we have about 98% of all voters voting on paper ballots. Countries like India don't have paper ballots. Countries like Brazil don't have paper ballots. There's some disconnect here in what's actually happening.
Scott, how has this been received among secretaries of state that you've talked to?
Yeah, we've heard from some Democratic secretaries of state, including in Pennsylvania, where they said this is an overreach. No matter your thoughts on what's being proposed here, that this is a state and local function, lawsuits aren't just inevitable. I think the lawsuits are imminent. This is going to come up and be challenged in front of the courts.
On constitutional grounds.
On constitutional grounds. But I think there's something more pernicious than this. You know, no matter whether this stands up to the test of the courts, there's concern from sources about this planting of seeds of doubt and distrust in the 2026 election. We've seen this playbook before, and it ended up in violence and an instability in America after 2020. And this does sow distrust, 20 months before the next big test in federal elections, whether Democrats get some control back in Congress.
And David, it's worth reminding ourselves that the swing states that the president justifiably points to pride with conducted themselves in some of the exact same ways that he, in this executive order, suggests are nefarious.
Look, we have paper ballots. We have checks that the states are actually checking on.
North Carolina, the ballots arrive after Election Day, and they're counted.
And he won that state. That's quite right. And we have checks against non-citizens voting. Even Republican and Democratic states have looked for them. They found precious few. Ohio found only 5 potential non-citizen voters over the last 15 years that would be even subject to prosecution. So this is just proof that our elections have been doing remarkably well under all of this scrutiny. Even court scrutiny have stood up.
And Scott, one thing I did see in the executive order, it's very deep in there, you have to look for it, is they want the Attorney General and the Department of Justice to make sure election officials are not being threatened or intimidated. It's good to see that there, because that's been going on for the better part of 4 years.
You'll also see in the executive order this potential of stripping funding away from states that don't
for non-compliance.
Yeah, that can get pernicious if misused, and if this is the law of the land, in quotes, it's going to be for the next president and the next president to have that type of power is quite something.
Scott McFarland, David Becker, thank you very, very much. I appreciate it. A year after the Dolly plowed into the Key Bridge in Baltimore, 11 crew members from that container ship, believe it or not, still haven't been allowed to go home. How a community near Baltimore has been and continues to offer them a helping hand. And that's next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back. 1 year after the container ship called Dolly struck and collapsed the Key Bridge near Baltimore, 11 crew members who were on that vessel are still in the Baltimore area. They were asked by federal officials to stay in this country while investigators reviewed the accident. That work is still going on. Now, fortunately for them, some groups in the Baltimore area have been looking after them, even as they wait to return home. One of those groups is led by Andrew Middleton. He is the director of Apostleship of the Sea, and I'm glad to say he joins me now. It's great to have you with us. Tell us about these folks, what they've been going through, and what you've been doing to help them out.
Oh, thank you for having me, Major. Yeah, we still have 11 crew members here. You know, they're kind of stuck here in a position where everything's kind of an unknown. They don't know when they'll be going home. They don't know when the legal process will be finished. So we're doing our best to support them spiritually, emotionally, meeting their physical needs. You know, we're doing grocery shopping trips to a local Indian grocery store. We've done some baseball games, a trip to Washington, D.C., anything to kind of help break up the monotony of being stuck here and not being allowed to work for, a year now.
And as I understand it, Andrew, they're being paid. Their lodging is being covered by the shipping company. They're just, as you said, reasonably, understandably, kind of bored out of their skulls because there are questions to be asked and answered, but that doesn't happen all that often, and they're just waiting, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're essentially sitting in their apartments, day in and day out, trying to figure out what they're going to do for the next 5 minutes, let alone the next 5 days, to entertain themselves. We make every effort to try and help them entertain themselves or do things that will entertain them.
Right. And can any of them, if they wanted to, take odd jobs or work in any official legal capacity in our country in this interim time?
I don't know that they can because of their visa status. So, it's some of them have expressed an interest in getting a job while they're here. But their visas, I don't think, are the correct visas in order to be employed here.
And Andrew, as I understand it, they are mostly Indians and one Sri Lankan. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but all, or mostly all, huge cricket fans. And you've been sort of pulled into their cricketing fandom universe, right?
Yeah. So I've watched one cricket match with the entire crew when they were all still here. And then messaged with a few of them about cricket here and there. I know that the master of the vessel is a big cricket fan, so he and I talk about cricket from time to time. One of these days, I'll figure out the rules and be able to actually enjoy the game as opposed to trying to figure out the rules. But it's something that we can share in common.
Andrew, I will ask you this favor: when you do figure out the rules to cricket, will you get in touch with me?
I absolutely will, if I ever figure them out.
In the meantime, while you and I do or do not indulge our cricket watching habits, language barriers, faith barriers, what kind of just fundamental, like day-to-day life things are they still working through?
Language is not really an issue. They all speak English. Religion, our ministry is a Catholic ministry, but we don't discriminate based on anyone else's religion. So, we're serving the Catholic crew, the Hindu crew, without regard to that. Just last week, I took a few of them down to one of the local Hindu temples for one of their festivals and spent maybe a half hour there with them, watching them celebrate and celebrating along with them.
And do you get a feeling that they've sort of gotten a different taste of Baltimore and that general region because they've been here so long and because so many folks have kind of come to their assistance?
I hope so. It's been their home for the last year, for better or for worse. And they seem to be learning as they go, and they're able to navigate themselves around to and from grocery store and local shops and entertainment to make life as normal as possible.
Well, if you can figure out cricket, you can probably figure out a garden variety metro bus line, and I guess that's one of the things that they've been able to successfully do. Andrew Middleton, thank you for your service to them. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a nice night.
That does it for today. I'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern, the Daily Report. That starts right now.